A double dose of Sports Illustrated's John Garcia Jr. in 1 week. Buddy, I'm here for it, and I think you guys are too. John Garcia Jr. is back with us to discuss Jason Moore's recent commitment to Ohio State and what quarterbacks Ohio State is currently going after in the class of 2023. You guys don't want to miss this conversation. It's only available right here on Locked On Buckeyes.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes for the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Wednesday, July 13th in the year 2022, and I want to thank you for making Locked On Buckeyes your first listen or first watch of every single day. On today's episode, we will be joined by Mr. John Garcia Jr. He is the director of football recruiting at Sports Illustrated and Locked On's recruiting insider to discuss Jason Moore, Brock Glenn, Austin Novosad, and other players. One, Moore's recent commitment, and other players that are recruits that Ohio State is currently going after that play quarterback. John's amazing. I see your clicks on your views on YouTube and the amount of times you click his videos that he is in. You guys love Buckeye recruiting. You love Buckeye football. And trust me, since John is back, I'm sure you're going to love this show too. And as we welcome in John Garcia Jr., he is the director of football recruiting for Sports Illustrated and Locked On's recruiting insider. I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. The last time John and I talked, we discussed a recent Buckeye commit in Miles Walker, an offensive tackle, that has some interesting things about him that I'm sure Buckeye fans will love. Literally a couple days later, the Buckeyes get a commitment from Jason Moore, a guy that John and I actually talked about a few weeks ago, maybe about a month or two ago now, while discussing Jason Moore as he whittled down and tied down the schools he wanted to go to and shortened his list. The Buckeyes were in that group. The Buckeyes is where he committed to go to. Hard verbal. John, were you surprised when you got the news that Jason committed to Ohio State?
Not at all, Jay. This was really, for me, a two-team race. You know, the only two coaching staffs my sources reciprocated any confidence from were Ohio State and Notre Dame. Certainly not the first time these two have battled for prospects in the trenches, even from the D.C. area, which is becoming kind of poaching grounds for the Big Ten, for independents, for the ACC. I mean, everybody recruits the DMV. So there was really a two-team race for this kid for quite some time with Jason Moore. I think the Irish confidence started to dwindle over the last few weeks, which certainly told you, based on that initial report we got, that Ohio State was starting to feel even better. And look, who's to bet against Larry Johnson for a defensive lineman? We talked about Brian Hartline last month with all these receivers. I mean, Larry Johnson's done that almost to that level for a much longer period of time. So that is almost the least surprising position to see Ohio State doing well in. But still, you got to go out and recruit these kids every single year. It's not just a layup, especially, again, outside of that Big Ten footprint over in Hyattsville, Maryland at DeMatha Catholic, where Jason Moore is from. So I think this is a really nice pickup. He could end up being the top defensive recruit in this Ohio State class. He certainly profiles as such right now. I know there's some really good DBs on board as well, and plenty of targets remaining. But as things currently stand, you could make that argument that Jason Moore is the best defensive recruit currently committed to Ohio State. And anytime you're in that conversation, no matter what time of year, it's a big-time pickup for your university. So, yeah, the Buckeyes just kind of continue rolling right there with the best of the best.
They do keep rolling. And I know, and I may have mentioned it with you, John, previously. I know I mentioned it on the show a few times. everyone looks at the receivers. The receivers get clicks. The receivers, some are described, well, some in the NFL ranks are described as divas. They all have that, some have that personality and that character trait attached to them. But receivers are great. You can't win football games without good offensive linemen and good defensive linemen, and you have to recruit those guys year after year after year to stay at the top like Ohio State currently is. And so we all love the Cardinal Tate, the Brandon Ennis, those type of recruitments and those type of commitments. But I believe that it's a guy like Jason Moore committing to Ohio State. And John, he's able not only going to be able to recruit other guys and help other guys commit to Ohio State, but also he's a good foundational building piece for the future, because without a good defensive line, the defense cannot be successful.
That's 100%. And I think his skill set, Jay, really mirrors what versatility Larry Johnson covets on the trail. He can win as a legitimate outside speed rusher, but there's a lot of inside ability with his game as well as his frame. 6'5", 6'6", 255, 260 pounds or so. Really not hard to imagine another 25 pounds added to Jason Moore's frame, and now all of a sudden he could be an interior pass rusher, which is really what wrecks a lot of offensive game plans. So there's a lot of ability here, extremely high floor in this case as well. So yeah, he's one that, like you said, it's not as easy to kind of fall in love with from a fan perspective, but when you think about the sport and you think about what clicks and premium positions, I mean, this kid can occupy potentially two different premium positions, right? Because we put that premium on pass rushers. We also put it on interior defensive linemen who can play on 3 downs. And he certainly profiles as such right now. And then again, you get into the floor, very well coached, DeMatha Catholic, elite competition every single Friday night. And he does it against all of those Catholic League schools in the DC area. And again, that has been a breeding ground for not only elite college football players, but guys who hit the ground running in college. You know, in that league, I think of Brian Brzee, who's now at Clemson. He was certainly a freshman superstar. Caleb Williams on offense. He's another kid from that league, freshman superstar. We see those guys from that league ready to go sooner compared to just about every other league in the country. So that competition level is another very important talking point when talking Jason Moore. So this is as close to a home run commitment as you're going to get this time of year.
Do you project him being a guy who stays on the outside once he's at Ohio State?
I think initially, yes. I mean, this defense has shown a whole lot of variance and versatility with these bigger edge prospects. The Bosa brothers were not these conventional slim pass rushers. They were bigger, bulkier edge guys. And I think, Ohio State has recruited kind of in that lane more so than not. I mean, outside of Zach Harrison, who was just a string bean coming out, he's finally now filled out that frame, and he looks like he'll be another first rounder. But the Chase Youngs, the Bosa brothers, I mean, these guys are not your tall, slim edge types that are just, hey, let's beat them with speed type guys. They're bigger, more technical prospects who can still win with speed, but that's not kind of their only calling card. They're a little bit more polished, and I think that's what you get with Jason Moore. Now, his frame, again, it looks like he can carry more weight, so maybe down the line he kicks inside, but certainly on the outset of his career, you expect him to be a strong side defensive end type who can work from a stand-up or hand-in-the-dirt position. He can set the edge and play the run game, and he can certainly rush the passer one-on-one with an offensive tackle. So I think he's most comfortable in that element, but there's no doubt. And we see it on tape a little bit. He works inside quite a bit at DeMatha Catholic. So I think that is a bit of a prelude to maybe his upperclassman years in Columbus. But there's just a lot to like here, and you could line him up at 2-3 different spots early in his career and probably have some sustained success. And I think that's a big deal when you're talking about, again, a premium position type prospect.
We are here with John Garcia Jr. He is the director of football recruiting at Sports Illustrated and Locked On's Recruiting Insider. Last thing here with Jason Moore. We talk about the speed. We talk about the strength. What's one thing that you think he needs to work on, once he gets to Columbus, what's one thing you think they'll try to work on quickly to add a certain skill set to his game?
Yeah, I think they'll certainly put on weight. That's not really a skill set thing.
Right.
He'll bulk up a little, but I do think he could play on a lower plane. Look, he's 6'5", 6'6". We just talked about that height. And at the high school level, when you're an Ohio State defensive line recruit, you can bully some offensive linemen. But I do think he could play on a bit of a lower plane with a lower center of gravity. So I just think it's kind of enhancing a strength as opposed to overhauling something technical about his game, which is, again, another reason why I think this is an instant impact or close to an instant impact player. There's just not a whole lot of holes in his game to pick apart. But I do think he could play a little bit lower relative to his frame, especially if he moves inside. I think you got more freedom and flexibility as an exterior guy. But when you move into the interior, you've got to be that much more technically sound, that much more right from a leverage standpoint, because 9 times out of 10, the blockers you're facing are bigger and more stout and thus have a lower center of gravity and better leverage than some of these longer, leaner offensive tackle types. So I do think that will be something that he'll continue to work on. But again, we get flashes of it on tape, just maybe not the consistency that Larry Johnson's standard would suggest. And again, that's all totally understandable, but there's so much else and so much depth to this kid's game. His motor is really strong. There's just a fight with him. Even if his technique is off or his center of gravity is a little too high, his base isn't quite set, he still just has this kind of fight where even though he's kind of using all his upper body strength and not really playing the leverage game, he's still getting to the ball carrier for tackles for loss. He's still getting to the quarterback for sacks. So I think that's where a lot of the natural ability really shows up on Friday nights with Jason Moore. So as you could tell, I'm a pretty big fan of his overall game and his floor. I think it's as high as any of these defensive commitments that OSU has on board just yet.
Yeah, you do seem like a fan, like a big fan of him as a player and what the Buckeyes are going to get with him joining the 2023 recruiting class. But John, with that recruiting class, and I think it was the last time you and I talked, you mentioned something about players that if you're trying to build a recruiting class, there are certain players you're trying to go after, and these positions are very, very important. One of them was offensive lineman, but the other one was a quarterback that was towards the top of your list while trying to build a recruiting class. Currently, as I've checked, and I don't think anybody else has information that I don't have right now as far as me just Googling certain things, the Buckeyes have no commitment from a quarterback right now in the 2023 recruiting class. What are you hearing about Brock Glenn and Austin Novosad?
We're just waiting at this point.
Okay.
Visits are done. Each of them, of course, took an official visit to Ohio State. You throw in a camp visit for Austin Novosad, and you understand that there's considerable interest there despite that Baylor commitment. But really, it's about the timeline. And I think Austin wants to do something before the end of July. I think he would like to get into August with everything behind him. Again, talked to him quite a bit at the Elite 11. He just – not that he seems over it, he just seems a little bit stressed about trying to pick between 3 schools, right? Baylor, where he's been committed since December, certainly Ohio State, which offered again in early June after a camp performance, and then, of course, down in Texas A&M, the in-state school. Both of his parents are A&M alumni, so that is an interesting angle there. They got the last visit and the last offer kind of simultaneously, so I do think that makes an impact with Novosad. But before that point, I really didn't see any other school getting involved. I think A&M was kind of the perfect storm to throw a wrench into things, but A&M is continuing to recruit other quarterbacks as well. So I do think that makes us feel like it's a little bit more of a Baylor-Ohio State situation as far as where we sit today. He liked the visit to A&M. Again, he's a legacy recruit for the Aggies, but you got the sense way back when he committed to Baylor that if he was going to stay in the vicinity, he was going to be a Baylor Bear. He kind of wants to define himself. So I do think that's a good thing for the Baylor argument as well as the Ohio State argument. And then with Brock Glenn, same kind of deal. He's not maybe as urgent as Austin Novosad, and it makes sense because he's got more contenders. He's looking at 5 schools at this point. Auburn was kind of the long-term favorite. They're still in the mix. Florida State was a bit of a dark horse. They are still in the mix, and their quarterback commitment is looking around Chris Parsons. So a little bit more urgency from Florida State to maybe bring in a Brock Glenn. And certainly Ohio State is another main program contending for this verbal commitment. LSU just offered him. TCU was his first official visit. So there's still a lot to be sorted out from the Brock Glenn camp. But relationships are huge with him. And he's made that clear at just about every step of the way. So even though it's technically 5 schools, LSU without a visit, just having to rely on Zooms, just like the pandemic era of college football recruiting, hard to imagine they could do enough. No disrespect to Brian Kelly and that staff, without a visit to reel in a Brock Glenn when schools like Auburn and Florida State in particular have been recruiting him for such a long time. Ohio State was kind of the wild card, a school that we didn't necessarily associate with him until recently, but once he took the visit, he kind of went, oh, okay, I get it. I get this whole lineage at the quarterback position. I get why it's such a big deal at OSU. So just like we said with Novosad, where it's technically a 3-team race, but I feel like it's more 2. I think with Brock Glenn, it feels like a 3-team race, even though he is saying 5. I'd be surprised if he ended up at TCU. I think it's a little too late for LSU, though he's saying otherwise. So I view Brock Glenn as Auburn, which is, the longest standing relationship, the legacy program for him, versus Ohio State and then Florida State as a bit of a dark horse, like I said. So I think that's more of a 3-team race there in the end. And he said, again, he wants to do it soon, but he's not got a date in mind. He's not like, hey, I have to do it by August 1st or whatever it is. So he's going to vet LSU as much as he can digitally and on the phone. But I think until he gets comfortable with that program, I don't think we'll see a decision come anytime soon. And other schools have talked about maybe jumping in the race for Brock Glenn. So the longer that one goes on, that one could get more interesting. So if you're a Buckeye fan, all attention on Austin Novosad first. I think he'll come off the board or finalize his decision sooner, and then Brock Glenn thereafter. And it'd be curious to see if other schools jump in the mix, especially if Novosad picks Ohio State. Then certainly you would imagine the Buckeyes are okay on Brock Glenn, and then other schools might feel like the door's open even more to try to make a late move. So fascinating between the two, both really good, both top 10 performers from the Elite 11 finals when we were out there in Los Angeles. A lot to like from each of these guys, and they both kind of rose at the same time. So good on Ohio State for staying in both races simultaneously. There's really no other program that is in for each guy so very much.
John, there are people out there that with the current way NIL may be being used, there are Buckeye fans that get a little uneasy when they hear Texas A&M going after a quarterback and all of the things we have heard. I don't even know if it's been confirmed, but there are things people have heard or rumors out there with the NIL stuff out there. And they're saying, well, maybe they're just going to buy Novosad. No, I don't know. I'm not going to say what I do. I have no idea what the money is out there. Money's being thrown around. I have no idea. I just read stuff on Twitter, hear stuff on shows. I'm like, that's interesting. That's not normal. Like, that seems weird that that's being thrown out to a young man that's still in high school. But do you think NIL will factor into the decision-making of Austin Novosad, knowing that Texas A&M and the rumors that are out there about their money that they're throwing to recruits, how that may affect his decision?
Look, I mean, again, it's naive to think that NIL is not playing a factor in some of these decisions. Again, talking to Novosad, you just get the sense he's his own kid. He's not really – he's not a follower. I mean, he's going to do his own thing. He started this Baylor class that, by the way, is one of the biggest classes in the country. They've got like 20, 21 commits to date, and he's a big reason why. So he's very much his own style. I do think the timing of some of these offers is something that he keeps track of. So that's why I think LSU, or excuse me, any schools trying to get involved late, like Georgia called him before the Elite 11, and he was like, thanks, but no thanks. So this is a different kid. So that prestige, the SEC allure, those things aren't home runs for him. They don't just line up without anything else. So I do think that he's going to do his own thing. So I think for most kids, NIL is huge. And I'm not saying he hasn't looked into it, because, look, if you've got some value, you should look into it. Right. You're a quarterback. You're the face of a program one day, right? So you should look into it. But I can tell you, talking to him 3, 4, 5 times and multiple times in person, he just doesn't seem like the type of kid that's really digging into the NIL aspect of this. I could be wrong here, but I'd be surprised if I was wrong on this front. I think he's looking at that later, not sooner.
I remember last offseason. No, it was actually earlier this year. Wow, this year's been a blur at times. Remember hearing about some things going on down at Auburn with their head coach, and there was a little weird situation going on with him. I don't know all the details, so I'm not going to try to describe what was going on. but many people thought that he might be up out of town and might lose his job very, very quickly shortly after he got it. I know if I was in high school and I'm seeing this and my parents are helping me, I'm assuming that Brock Glenn's parents are helping him make this decision, that situation might push me away from going to that school because of the uneasy situation surrounding the head coach, who's going to be a big part of your son, not just on the football field, but just helping him mature and grow and be a better young man. And so that situation there is very interesting because the head coach situation at Auburn is not like it is at Ohio State, as far as dysfunction. Now, there are rumors every offseason, Ryan Day's looking at this job or that job in the NFL. I really think Ryan Day loves Ohio State, loves Columbus, and loves what's going on. But, of course, there's a pool of the NFL. It's completely different than dysfunction around the head coach. Do you think the situation at Auburn surrounding their head coach is something that is possibly pushing Brock Glenn away from going to Auburn and considering one of the other schools that are in his final group?
It's come up. I mean, programs talk, kids talk,
right?
People around these kids talk. And look, he's a Memphis kid, right? He grew up in that SEC belt. So I do think that he's plenty aware of the perception and chatter around Auburn. And again, his name is Auburn Brock Glenn, literally. So he knows plenty about that school. His grandfather graduated from there, a couple of cousins, I believe, as well. He's very much plugged into Auburn. So he definitely knows the chatter and has probably asked and vetted questions surrounding that chatter. Because why wouldn't you, right? You're a quarterback. There's some hot seat stuff in year 2 with Brian Harsin. That's early. That's very early. We don't see a whole lot of moves made that early. But there was certainly some offseason negativity towards that program, and he's certainly aware of it. But he's visited several times, including an official visit. I would imagine by now he's kind of moved on from that thought. Doesn't mean he's moved on from Auburn, but I think if he had questions earlier in the spring and early summer months, I do think he got all of those questions answered. So I don't think that would be the reason he doesn't pick Auburn. But certainly you would imagine it does factor in at some point during his recruitment process. And if he has the clarity that we think he does with that situation, I don't think it'll be a detractor for that family, pick, which would certainly be the Auburn Tigers at this point. But we've been saying that for months. So there's another sense of if he knew he was going to Auburn, he'd be committed already.
Right.
So that does exist, and that could potentially keep the door open again for Ohio State and the dark horse that is Florida State. So I do think that's interesting as time goes on here. I think that the door opens for all the other schools in the mix.
If these two kids decide to go somewhere else, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, Novosad sticks with Baylor, Brock Glenn goes to Auburn, do you think the Buckeyes find a quarterback and go after somebody else to commit in this group?
Well, they've already gone after one committed elsewhere, right? With Novosad being committed to Baylor. So I would assume Ohio State would go after other recruits that have already made their college decisions. Several recruits in the Southern footprint and beyond that are committed at quarterback have looked around, right? Chris Parsons, a Florida State commitment from Tennessee. He's visited Mississippi State and SMU. Virginia Tech just offered him today. We talked about Novosad taking visits. Virginia just flipped a quarterback that was committed to another program. Alabama basically flipped a Texas A&M quarterback commitment. There's still some potential for quarterbacks that are committed to one school to continue to look elsewhere. Ricky Collins is a kid from Baton Rouge who's committed to Purdue that other schools have vetted. Florida State has offered. LSU's trying to keep him close to home. So maybe he would be available for a late visit. And then there's this other group of emerging talents. Remember, we're still only in July. So kids are still going to rise as seniors. I remember Jackson Dart, who was at USC and now is at Ole Miss. At this time of his senior year, he didn't have a Power 5 offer. And then all he did was break Utah's passing record and go crazy on the recruiting trail. He ends up, picking USC there in the end. So there's still time for that emerger to emerge, whether it's a Midwest kid or somewhere else. We know Ohio State has gone everywhere for its quarterback in years past. And remember, C.J. Stroud He was just breaking out this time during his recruitment when he won the Elite 11, out throwing Bryce Young. That was last week in retrospect, right? So there's still time for other quarterbacks to emerge. Heck, there's a kid in the Midwest who's emerging right now, Jackson Smolik from Iowa, who's been committed to Tulane for about a month. He went to the Elite 11 as a replacement for a quarterback who didn't show up, and he tore it up. And now he's got Cal, LSU's talking to him. Penn State is talking to him after they just lost their quarterback to the Florida Gators, who flipped Marcus Stokes. So there's still a lot of quarterback movement and dominoes to sort out, including among those who are currently verbally committed to one program. So when you're Ohio State and you have that pedigree and you're known for this explosive offense that, is probably the most highly anticipated to watch by the entire country this year, that's going to help you stay in the game or jump in very late for quarterbacks and still have a chance to actually pull off a verbal commitment. So I wouldn't worry too much if I'm a Buckeyes fan, even if both of these other quarterbacks end up elsewhere.
John, it's always fun having you on. It's always fun, just from my standpoint, getting all this information, taking it all in, soaking it in, and then if someone asks me a question, I can say, well, John Garcia says this, and he knows his stuff. So it really helps me not just be better and know more about the recruits, but also just be able to help other people learn more about Buckeye recruiting as well. John, if you could, let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter, and then also where they can catch out all the great things SI is doing right now regarding recruiting that Buckeye fans will probably love.
Well, we're going to update the quarterback dominoes, right? Because on Monday, a quarterback came off the board in Dylan Lonergan. So we're going to reset everything and see where things are at. Certainly, there'll be some Ohio State mentions there on Tuesday. Check that out for free, si.com/college. And I'm on social media as well, at John Garcia_JR.
And you guys can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. Trying to get John on once a week. This week it was actually twice due to the recording and things like that. But whenever John's on, it's fun. I see you guys in the YouTube comments asking questions. I try to filter those through as I'm talking on the show. So what you guys are asking and thinking about can come through your speakers, either in the television speakers, your car speakers, whatever it is. And just love having John on. And look forward to having him on again because there's other things that the Buckeyes need to fill, other positions. I can't wait to hear what John has to say about that. John Garcia, thank you for coming back on Locked on Buckeyes. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Take care.